All right. Today is Tuesday, May 16th. Welcome to another economic discussion. We start from the wall of worry, and this time around, what else? The debt ceiling negotiations. Today we concluded an important meeting between President Biden and Speaker McCarthy, and it appears that both sides are still far apart. Here's what the Speaker of the House said after the meeting concluded. Take a look.
Well, the great thing about that question is we've already have taken default off the table because the House Republicans passed a bill that raised the debt ceiling, limited our future spending, saved taxpayers money by being able to pull back unspent money and waste, and actually grow our economy by making our economy stronger and lifting people out of poverty into work. And so those are the parameters we'll talk about. Yes.
Do you think a deal could be possible?
It is possible to get a deal by the end of the week. It's not that difficult to get to an agreement. When you think about limit, save, grow, the bill we passed, we raised the debt ceiling.
Now, you gotta understand two important things. Number one, McCarthy has very little room for maneuver. The bill he's talking about all the time barely passed at the House by his own party. So this is the bare minimum that his party will approve of, meaning he can maybe take some here, some there, but there is very little room for maneuver. And the question becomes, is it more likely for McCarthy to capitulate or for Biden? And the answer might be clear right now that, yeah, sure, McCarthy cannot capitulate, but maybe Biden could. Hold that thought, because a little bit of heat was turned on the Biden side today. But number two, in what McCarthy been saying, why does he keep bringing up the fact that the House already raised the debt ceiling? You see, they keep saying, oh, default is off the table, and we're supposed to take some comfort from that. That's bullshit. Default is on the table. And the evidence of that is the fact that McCarthy keeps bringing up and reminding us that they have already raised the debt ceiling at the House. This is the insurance policy for the Republicans in case we get into a default. To say, look, this is Biden's fault. We have already raised the debt ceiling, but it's the president party who rejected the deal and caused the default. So it's not our fault. We've already raised the debt ceiling. This is really important to understand. So now we go back to, is it easier for McCarthy to capitulate or Biden? The answer for now is, of course it's easier for Biden to capitulate. But here's the problem. Today we heard from AOC, and she said that Biden choosing to compromise with the GOP on a debt ceiling deal would be profoundly destructive, and the White House should expect pushback on nearly any significant concession. And this is going to tie Biden's hand, because this could be a major political loss if he compromises. As you will see in the data from this video, if he compromises on student loans, for example, this will annihilate the younger consumer, who are already drowning in debt. So there will be a political cost to pay. And now all of a sudden the negotiations become really, really complicated. I know for now the talking heads in the media and the stock market remain sanguine that, oh, we're going to get a deal, don't worry about it, this is a nothing burger. But do you realize how hard is it for both sides to capitulate or even compromise? And the clock is ticking. We don't have much time. With that out of the way, let's segue to the consumer. We got the data from Bank of America a few days ago, and it shows more weakness in consumer spending. When we look at the data from April versus March, we can see that consumer spending in pretty much every single category went down, and in certain categories, stunningly so. When we look at the services side, for now, restaurants spending remains positive, but it is declining. It is weakening, and I will show you more data that suggests we will see spending at restaurants going negative, and that will seal the deal on this economy. When folks stop spending at restaurants and dining out, it's over. And then look at the decline in airlines, month over month. Unbelievable. Spending on housing-related services improved month over month while still being negative. Lodging went down month over month. So when they say in the media that the consumer is strong and resilient, and the consumer is spending on services, and they travel, and they stay at hotels and Airbnbs, well, we've seen what Airbnb's earnings look like, and the stock went down by over 10% in reaction to that. Now, consumer spending is declining in lodging altogether, which means you're going to start to see even hotel stocks getting hit. When we look at retail, beauty stores, that's still holding for now, although spending went down month over month. So you see stocks such as Ulta Beauty, for example, doing pretty good. But how long will they continue to hold? We look at clothing, down month over month, it remains in negative territory. Home improvement stores, well, there is a little bit of improvement month over month, while spending continues to be negative. And we'll talk about Home Depot in a minute. When we look at luxury fashion, one of the most resilient, if you want to use that word, one of the most resilient categories in any recession, because the affluent consumer stays healthy. Well, the affluent consumer is getting annihilated, and I will show you the data in a minute. But luxury fashion spending went down month over month, and it remains in deeply negative territory. And the same goes for furniture. And here it is. We got the earnings from Home Depot in the morning. The headline reads, Home Depot posts the worst revenue miss in about 20 years, and they lowered the forecast as consumers delay big projects. Look at the headline again. The worst miss in about 20 years, and that includes the housing crisis too. And oh, by the way, they downgraded the forecast. When you adjust that to inflation, it is absolutely shocking that spending, revenues, earnings will be all negative for Home Depot. And then came retail sales data in the morning, and while the reading was confusing month over month, spending went higher. But then you look at this tweet by Charlie Bigelow, and he said that U.S. retail sales increased 0.5 percentage point over the last year, the lowest growth rate since May 2020, and well below the historical average of 4.8%. Listen to this. After adjusting for inflation, though, the story is far worse. Retail sales fell 4.2% over the last year, the sixth consecutive year-over-year decline. So when you hear the garbage about, oh, the consumer is healthy and strong and resilient, what are you talking about? The consumer is getting annihilated out there, and you will see that in the data. So let's do that, and here it is. In focus tonight. Annihilated. This is what's going on in reality to the American consumer. We start with credit cards. In the same data provided by BofA, we look at the percentage of respondents with a rainy day quote-unquote fund saying that this would last them more than 6 months. You can see that the percentage is going down year on year, even among the higher income consumer. And all in all income categories, less than 50% of respondents in each category, lower income, mid-income, higher income, said that they have a rainy day fund that will last them 6 months, meaning that 50% or more in each segment are not prepared. They don't have a rainy fund that will last them 6 months in case they lose their jobs. All of that savings from the pandemic era is now gone thanks to inflation. So the consumer has no other choice but to resort to credit card usage. And we got the shocking data from the New York Fed just yesterday. The headline reads, credit card debt failed to decline in the first quarter for the first time in over 20 years. Consumer credit card debt now exceeds $1 trillion, and the rate on that $1 trillion continues to move higher and higher and higher. And now we're talking about 20% average, the highest level since 1985. And the reason is the consumer is living paycheck to paycheck, and they're barely getting through. With inflation continuing to stick, regardless of what the talking heads in the media or the so-called propagandist economists, the corporate tools might say, inflation is sticking and it is harming the American consumer, and we can see it all around us. The headline reads, timing could not be worse. Inflation is easing, but more people are using credit cards for unexpected expenses. And we know this article is from January. The Fed continuing to raise rates higher and higher and higher, and inflation continues to stick. In regular times, the consumer used to save, and if they have to meet any unexpected expenses, they can cover that. But now with inflation, more and more Americans having to use credit cards to meet those unexpected expenses. A record number of people say they would need to pay for an unplanned $1,000 expense by using their credit card, according to a new survey showing the burden of high prices even as inflation rates ebb from 4-decade highs. 1/4 of people said they would rely on credit cards and have to gradually pay off $1,000 in unanticipated costs for something like a car repair or a medical problem. And that is the biggest percentage of people saying that they would need to finance the unbudgeted $1,000 expense through credit cards. Listen to this. Since Bankrate began asking about the topic in 2014, the number is up from 20% 1 year earlier. and up from 16% in January 2020, the survey noted. And it's not stopping, folks. According to the New York Fed Consumer Survey that we got recently, more and more accounts are being opened for credit cards. And we know why. The consumer is getting squeezed even more, and they need to use more and more credit card debt. Now, in the same data provided by the New York Fed, we can see that the percent of balance 90 days plus delinquent by loan type, credit cards are starting to perk up again, while student loans collapsed, and we know why. So any compromises by Joe Biden's administration regarding student loans would mean a severe political loss and would certainly create a lot of economic damage, specifically in certain demographics. We'll talk about that in a minute. You can look at this chart and say, hey, Maverick, it's not really that bad. I mean, yeah, sure, credit card delinquencies are rising a little bit higher, but they're still below prior years. Now watch this. Let's do the 30 days plus delinquencies. And now, credit card debt, auto loans, all surging higher rapidly. And all of this, ladies and gentlemen, is happening when we have the lowest unemployment rate almost in history. What do you think will happen if we start to lose jobs? And the damage is not going to stop here, where the consumer getting annihilated. Even credit card companies will feel the pain. You see what's going on in bank stocks. And of course, feeling the pain, Discover stock, because they warned about rising credit card losses. At some point, these firms, when consumers get delinquent at some point in certain accounts, they have to feel the pain. Now, a lot of these companies are already feeling pain by rising interest rates. We see banks blowing up. Are we about to see credit card issuers also blowing up next? Credit cards typically reach their peak loss rates about 18 months after origination. That means that Discover is expecting losses to tick up this year on accounts it started in 21, which was a much bigger year for credit card growth than 2020, when the pandemic forced the company to curtail new business. The CEO of Discover says in 22 the loans that would have been hitting peak losses were the 2020 vintage, which was extraordinarily small and extraordinarily clean as opposed to when you look forward to 23 and beyond. You start to see the vintages we booked in 21 and 22. Starting last year, and this is before the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, Discover began gradually tightening underwriting standards by offering smaller lines of credit to new consumers, or customers, I should say. What does that mean? The tightening of credit conditions began last year, and it took a major leap this year, which means if the consumer is getting squeezed and they cannot even afford an unexpected expense, they have to rely on credit cards, and the credit card issuers are tightening credit conditions. What do you think will happen to the consumer? And it's not just happening to the poor or middle-class consumer. Even the so-called affluent consumer is now starting to fall apart. Let's listen to Tillman Fertitta. Never heard an Italian guy speak like this before, but he owns a lot of businesses, and he knows what's going on in the lower income, mid-income, and even the affluent consumer. And he's not seeing good things. Take a look.
So you're seeing this across the spectrum of your restaurants, I think I'm hearing you say, because you really have the waterfront covered from sort of family-style restaurants all the way up to high-ends like Mastro's.
Yeah, definitely, Tyler. You're seeing it, but you are seeing it more so in the higher end.
Interesting.
And we own Mastro's, Catch, Del Frisco's, Martin's, the Palm, and you know, you've got a problem in the higher end right now because of the fact that the individual consumer is not out there spending money like they did a year ago and 2 years ago.
And the data from BofA confirms all of that. We look at discretionary spending per household on Bank of America credit and debit cards. What's really important is the 1 month percentage change. You can see in the lower income consumer, spending went higher month over month. And this illustrates that the lower income consumer is getting squeezed and they have to use more and more credit card debt. For mid-income, not a lot of change, but most alarmingly, for the affluent consumer, $125,000 and above, spending collapsed. We can read two things from this piece of data. Number one, perhaps a lot of tech workers with high income lost their jobs and they're cutting down in spending, and that's recessionary for the economy. Number two, a lot of the high income consumers, they tend to be more financially savvy. When they see things heading into a recession, they start cutting on spending. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We've seen the same behavior right before the crash in 2008-2009. The affluent consumer tends to cut back first, and then comes the mid-class consumer, and of course the lower income consumer. They have no other choice but to continue to spend and use credit cards to keep up with expenses, until, of course, they start losing their jobs. And then they're left with a massive bag of debt. What are they going to do with that debt then? Who will bail them out? Are we going to see a massive wave of bankruptcies all over the country? Are we going to use taxpayer money to cancel all of that debt? All of these are good questions that we have to revisit when this is all said and done. Now, we can see from the same data from BofA that wage growth is dropping like a rock, specifically in the high-income consumer. It has now went negative. Now keep in mind, this is not even adjusted or counting for inflation. If we count inflation in, which is now standing at around, let's say, 5%, all consumers in every income category are losing to inflation. Wage growth is negative across all categories. But this is what I find the most alarming piece of data. You see, in the media, they say maybe we're going to have a soft landing in the economy, and the reason is we're not seeing any job losses. The unemployment rate remains low. But perhaps one of the most reliable leading indicators to the unemployment rate is initial jobless claims. Those have been surging higher as of late. And guess who's getting hit the hardest? The answer is the high-income consumer. Unemployment is rising higher among the high-income group, and we know why. A lot of tech layoffs recently, and this impacts the higher-income group the most, which, by the way, this group tend to stimulate the economy more than any other group. The low-income consumer, they're getting with the bare minimum. The mid-income consumer may be spending here and there, but the majority of spending on services is happening or used to happen by the high-income consumer. If they're getting hit, if they're cutting back on spending, then we're going to see a massive recession wave washing the economy, not just in goods this time around, but even the services sector, which has been holding pretty good, is about to get hit. Now, on the bright side, this will take the rate of inflation down, but on the negative side, the drop in inflation will come as a result of an increasing chance of a recession in the economy. Now, look no further than the disaster in the auto market. Let's talk about auto loans. When we look at financing rates, be it new car financing, used cars financing, or even leasing, these rates have more than doubled since March of 21, 11.4%, and this is the data from last year. These rates are getting worse now with the Fed raising rates. But even last year, the rate for used cars financing was 11.4%. For new cars, 7%. Leasing, 5.7%. And the result of all of that is we see more and more $1,000 a month plus in auto loans payments. Now, this is disastrous. Paying $1,000 a month for a vehicle. We're not talking about an apartment or a house or a mortgage. We're talking about a vehicle, in most cases a used vehicle. And the consumer is now carrying this debt for longer and longer and longer. The highest growth is in the category of 6 to 7 years, which is even during the height of the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis. We've never seen this. Now we see folks having to divide these payments for over 5 years, 6 to 7 years, sometimes 10 years. Again, folks, we're not talking about mortgages here. We're talking about auto loan payments. And we know that vehicles are depreciating assets. So what is the result of extending all of these payments at high interest rates for 5, 6, 7 years when you have a depreciating asset, which to begin with was used? Here it is. The headline reads, a growing number of car buyers have loans worth more than their vehicles. And experts are worried about a surge of delinquencies. You see, the value of your car is going down and the value of your loan is going higher because rates are going higher. The end result is negative equity. We see that negative equity, and this is the data from last year, by the way, since it has gotten worse. We're talking about a negative equity of 6,000, 7,000, even beyond that. This is a trap. This is a deep hole that the consumer is in, and there is no way to dig themselves out of it. Experts at Edmunds estimate that the number of vehicle sales with a trade-in with negative equity, you sell a dealer or used car, and its price gets taken off the new car I'm buying, has increased from 14.9% in 21 to 17.4% in 22. Additionally, the amount owed on upside-down car loans has increased from an average of $4,141 in 21 to an average of $5,341 in 22. For instance, Bloomberg reported that a driver in the Atlanta area traded in two used cars for a new, a bigger one, and walked out of the car dealership with a Ford Explorer valued at $49,000 and $66,000 in debt. Now, what happens if you're sitting on a negative equity vehicle that is depreciating in value? And oh, by the way, we're not even accounting for insurance costs, which are skyrocketing. What happens if this borrower loses his or her job? The answer is delinquency rates will increase, and we're already seeing this happening. The subprime auto delinquency rates are now surpassing the great financial crisis. The headline reads, car payments push Americans closer to the financial edge, with severe delinquency rate the highest in 17 years. And therefore, we see rejection rate for auto loans jumping higher, the highest in 6 years. And this is the data from last year. What happens if we see delinquencies rising higher? The answer is repos will explode higher. Take a look.
That nightmare, a reality for a surging number of families nationwide. After tumbling at the start of the pandemic, the rate of American borrowers dubbed severely delinquent, or at least 60 days overdue on their car payments, is up nearly 18% from a year ago. That same rate for subprime borrowers, up 40% in the last 2 years. Repo agencies say the impact is obvious.
The number of cars referred to you by the banks to get repossessed has tripled?
Correct. It's all about inflation. You know, the price of fuel, price of food, and a lot of the customers can't keep up with their car payment and feed their family.
Especially given climbing car prices, the average monthly new vehicle payment hitting an all-time high of $730, many boosted by rising interest rates.
And the saddest part of all of this is what's going on to the younger generation, the millennials, the Gen Zers. When this is all said and done, they will experience something that perhaps the Japanese consumer back in the late 80s and 90s have experienced. They have since been traumatized. A lost decade, a lost generation. And I believe the same will happen here. Car dealership guy says this is what happens when you grow up with TikTok and Instagram. Gen Z is more likely to buy a luxury car than any other generation. 39% of Gen Zers are getting in debt to buy a luxury car. 29% of millennials, 27% of Gen Xers, and 12% of boomers. When we look at the growth in outstanding car loans all the way to the fourth quarter of last year, among the age group between 18 to 29, 31% have borrowed to buy a vehicle. 30 to 39, 29%. And they say that 1 in 5 Gen Zers say the car payment accounts for over 20% of their after-tax income. Unbelievable. And here's the result. The data from the New York Fed that we got this week transition into serious, underline serious, delinquency 90-plus days by age for auto loans. It is skyrocketing for the age group between 18 to 29. And this leads us to generation debt. Look at the data from TransUnion, consumer credit cards with 90 days plus delinquent. We can see that millennials and Gen Zers are leading every other generation here. The delinquency rate is rising higher, surpassing the rates from pre-pandemic. We'll look at the change in total debt from 3 years ago. In the group aged 30 to 39, this rate is also moving higher. And this is the highest rate we have seen since the mid-2000s before the great financial crisis. The headline reads, millennials in their 30s have racked up a historic $3.8 trillion in debt. And this is the largest accumulation of debt by that age group over any 3 years since the financial crisis of 2008. The result is this devastating headline, millennials are not having kids because they have too much student loan debt. That could hurt the American economy for generations. And now you understand in this debt ceiling negotiations that the Biden side cannot really compromise on student loan debt. It would cost them politically and it will wreak havoc into this economy. Spending by millennials and Gen Zers in this economy is hanging by a thread. If they have to resume paying back their student loans, they cannot even afford that. They're already drowning in credit card debt, in auto loan debt, and God knows what else. And it gets even worse for Gen Zers. The headline reads, Gen Z is chalking up credit card debt and falling behind on their payments faster than any other generation. And since their accessibility to credit cards is limited, they have to resort to buy now, pay later services. They're utilizing buy now, pay later than any other age group. And unfortunately, they're not only using this for clothing, shoes, accessories, or buying phones, they're also using buy now, pay later services to buy groceries. And as we see the surge of buy now, pay later plans, and with it a lot of debt, delinquencies are also rising higher in these buy now, pay later, or perhaps pay never services. This is the data going back to 21. We're not even accounting 22 or even 23. The numbers are getting worse, but even in 21. We can see that the age group of 18 to 24 and then 25 to 33, they're more likely to have one or more loans in default in their buy now, pay later plans. And again, the data from the New York Fed survey that we got this week confirms all of that. When we look at transition into serious delinquencies 90 days plus by age, 18 to 29, the rate is moving higher again. Now you can look at this data and say, okay, but we are way below the pre-pandemic era. Nothing to see here. Then you look at transition into serious delinquencies 90 days plus for credit cards by age, and now it's getting more alarming. And a reminder, all of this data is happening while we have the lowest unemployment rate perhaps in history. What do you think will happen if the unemployment rate starts to move higher? Delinquencies will lead to repos and bankruptcies. And with that comes the destruction of credit scores. If credit scores are destroyed, can you really buy a home in the future? Can you secure loans from banks to start a business? Can you even buy a car in the future with this kind of record? The answer is absolutely not. The headline reads, "It ruined everything. Buy now, pay later drives Gen Z into debt." A lot of folks assume that buy now, pay later services have no impact on your credit score. That could not be any further from the truth. Here's the story of one Gen Zer. In just 2 months, the Chicago native racked up $5,000 in debt across 3 of the installment loan firms. The ballooning balances, alongside unexpected medical costs, drained much of her savings and prompted her to seek help from a financial advisor. But the damage was already done. Whatever her name is, credit score dropped to 580 from 720 after she closed her accounts. And of course, now even Apple is joining the party to prey on consumers, and they're launching their own buy now, pay later services. This economy, all in all, is hanging by a thread. It depends on racking up more and more and more debt. This is how we live. This is how we've been living. And inflation peeled the cover on this ugly truth. With tightening credit conditions and mounting debt, combined with sticky inflation, and perhaps a looming wave of unemployment coming, how could any rational observer say that this economy will experience a soft landing? You gotta be out of your mind to say that. But we have to end with a positive message, that perhaps all of this pain that we are experiencing as consumers and we're about to experience will change our reckless behavior when it comes to spending and living beyond our means. Maybe we will become more rational, more responsible in the future, and that could be the silver lining from this story. And with that, folks, we have reached the conclusion of this video. Hope you found it informative, and I cannot say entertaining because it is a dark subject, but informative is good enough. And if you did, please subscribe, press the like button, the notification bell, you know the deal. But folks, this is all I got for you for now. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow. Good night.
It's a stock exchange. There's no money you can steal.
Really? And why are you people here?